Now we come to our final speaker of this afternoon, Ms. Star Parker. Star is the founder and president of CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, a 501c3 nonprofit think tank that provides a national voice of reason on issues of race and poverty. Before her involvement in social activism, Star Parker had 7 years of first-hand experience in the grip of welfare dependency. Now, as a social policy consultant, Star is bringing new energy to policy discussions on how to transition Americans poor from government dependency. Star is a sought-after expert on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and for national radio, television, and print interviews nationwide. She has appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, Larry King Live, The View, CNN, Fox News, and so forth. I believe you will be touched and inspired by her story and work. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Star Parker to speak at the 3rd Annual Chattanooga Tea Party Tax Day Rally. Please help me give Star a warm Tennessee welcome. Thank you, Star. Appreciate it.
Hello, 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 Chattanooga. Wow, what a windy day, huh? I wish we can get some of that wind in Washington, D.C. to blow all the liberals away so that I can go home and be my grandkid. I'm just so thankful to be a part of you and to also be invited back. And I have my cowgirl boots on. People are asking me why I have cowgirl boots if I'm from California, because it's a beach town that I live in. But I have to remind them that my airport is called John Wayne. Of course we have cowgirl boots in California. But I do work in Washington, D.C. I get the privilege of being with those liars and thieves on a regular basis. And I was so glad to hear from you a couple of years ago when the Tea Partiers showed up in Washington, D.C. As Dick Vickery said, we've been waiting for you a long time. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Star Parker. And I have made the news on a regular occasion, not just as a conservative activist, but because of my life story. You know, I believe the lie of the left. I believe that poor people are poor because rich people are rich. I believe that we should redistribute based on what my ancestors had been through. I believed all of their lives to the point that I lived in and out of welfare for 7 years, 3.5 years consistently, while I watched my life go into a little dark hole. You know, last week we had opportunity again to talk about abortion in Washington, D.C., and why it is that we're spending our hard-earned tax money as conservatives, $360 million a year in corporate welfare to a $1.2 billion company called Planned Parenthood that makes its business and makes its money killing the offspring of poor people. When you think about abortion, I lived that lie too. I was 4 times into their so-called safe, legal, rare clinics before I had a gut instinct way down deep inside that there must be something wrong with killing your offspring. And then it wasn't until the Lord got a hold of my heart that I began to change my life. I adopted a Christian worldview, and I began on this journey. I began on a journey that many had spoke about before, that the answer to poverty is freedom. It's personal responsibility. It's not a welfare state. And I then began to change my life and the direction for my life, and then my business life changed. After the 1992 Los Angeles riots, my little small business was destroyed. I started focusing on social policy. I started speaking verbally about the destruction of the welfare state, how these political promises of the left, they continue to make these political promises of entitlement that they'll go into somebody else's pocket and steal their hard-earned money. And the people that believe those lies, while they watch their family lives collapse, their neighborhoods totally crumble, their schools underperform, and their crime rates soar. And they keep believing this poverty mentality and this redistribution message, and they're just over and over again becoming very dependent on government. Some say I committed at that point social suicide. Perhaps I did. I've been called worse names than you've been called when you showed up in Washington racist. In fact, I've been called so many names that I had to hire someone special just to read through the death threats of my mail that comes in. But I don't mind, because the values of this country are worth protecting. When I adopted my biblical worldview, I adopted that worldview because I believe in traditional values. Choice loses its meaning if it doesn't matter what you choose. And these are the messages that need to go back into Washington, D.C., that we need a limited government, because the role of government is to protect our interests and our pursuits, not to exploit them, not to plunder them. And I believe in free markets. I believe that profit is good. Profit is not only good, it's moral, because it gives us the tangible evidence that we can invest in tomorrow's inventions around the world. One of the things that George W. Bush said often was that we're only 5% of the whole world. That means 95% of the rest of the world needs what we have here that we are not even valuing anymore. So I set up an organization called CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, with the mission to look for market-based solutions to fight poverty, to get our government out of the poverty business, where we redistributed now over $700 billion a year we spend on poverty programs, $400 billion just in programs like HHS, Health and Human Services. What's really interesting about the welfare, for those of you that don't get an opportunity to visit Washington, D.C., the welfare offices are on Independence Avenue, just to give you an idea of what's at stake and how hard our work has become. You know, I was noticing the other day when we were talking about the union and how we're going to dismantle their influence in Washington, D.C., the AFL-CIO offices, their front door look exactly at the front door of the White House to show you how entrenched their interest is in Washington, D.C. We have a lot of work to do. But I was on this journey just to do this work so that I can get the black community to realize what has happened to them. How they had started this journey out of slavery through Jim Crow to end up at the heavy hand of government, to where 65% now work for government, 25% live off the hand of and the work of others, and the poverty rate hasn't changed at all. But one thing government did do, Uncle Sam was very good at doing, was to dismantle the black family. We moved from 22% out of wedlock birth rates to 72% out of wedlock birth rates. We can't keep going like this. We're at a critical cross point in this nation where we must decide who we're going to be. You know, this whole notion of redistribution of wealth is so inconsistent with our founding, freedom and personal responsibility, but it's also inconsistent with the scripture. The 10 Commandments says don't covet. And socialism is rooted in covetousness. Somebody has something somebody else doesn't have, so we go hire politicians to take it from them. That's theft. And it will never work in this great country of ours, and there are people that are going to make sure it doesn't. So I ended up with my organization, and I'm commuting back and forth, running around this country, and then commuting back and forth from California to Washington, D.C. on a regular basis for the last 20 so years. And then about 5 years ago, I decided I'm going to set up my interests in Washington 100% of the time, and I would just still live in California. And a lot of people think that's a long commute, but for those that are not familiar with Los Angeles and Orange County, I was based in Los Angeles, and I live in Orange County, and that commute up and down that 405 freeway was a lot harder than commuting across the country, I'll tell you. Sometimes it would take me 2 hours to get to work and back, and so I can fly across country, stay there a few weeks, and go back. But my friends were saying, now you must be in midlife crisis. Why in the world would you move to Washington, D.C. in the middle of the winter? And of course I thought, well, it can't get that bad. Next time I'm going to bring my mink coat down here to Tennessee. I'm thinking it can't be that bad. God must be really mad at you because we had a hell of a storm last night. Kept me up all night. But anyway, I moved out there in the middle of winter time, and sure enough, it got bad. But it got really cold, and I figured I must really be in midlife crisis when Nancy Pelosi picked up the gavel that same year. 2 years later, Barack Obama's elected, and I'm wondering what in the world's going on with the American people. Don't they realize what's at stake? Have we forgotten what this country was founded upon? Have we forgotten some of the things that we just heard about what the framers said about freedom? How we can lose it very rapidly if we don't keep it in check? How they knew themselves that we could not self-govern without a three-part government that we were engaged in. It's kind of like what President Garfield said. If you have corruption and recklessness in Washington, it's because the people tolerate recklessness and corruption in Washington. And we had accepted the status quo. But when Barack Obama showed up there, I knew that there has to be something wrong, that maybe God was mad at me, and I was heading back to California. I'm going to get out of here because I was not going to be there during that inaugural. And so I was heading out, going back to California, and I went through Minnesota to go through the airport there. You know how they stop you off somewhere else, and then you have to go fly in. And I was waiting for my connection flight, and I went in this little restaurant. You know how little restaurants, sometimes they'll put up little signs to express themselves? This particular restaurant had little statements all over the place. They had pictures of all the celebrities that had been through, and then they had these little signs. And in my booth where I sat to have my little meal while I'm waiting for my connection flight, there was a little statement from General Douglas MacArthur. And it said, we're not retreating. We're heading in another direction. And I'm thinking, now that's a word for me. And I went back to my home, and I pulled out my scripture like I always do. I got in my Habakkuk chair, and I figured I'm going to sit here until God speaks about what in the world is happening to this country of ours. Because the people that were coming to Washington now were the hard left. It's one thing to deal with liberals, but when you have the hard left, we were in serious trouble as a nation.